Good evening, everyone. I'll try that again. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for braving the snow to attend this special screening of the Fifth Estate's upcoming documentary, Missing Black Boys. My name is Alia Davidson, and I'm the executive producer of The Fifth Estate. We are CBC's investigative documentary program of record. The show counts many awards, honors, changed laws, and changed lives in its legacy. I'm often asked what an executive producer does. A lot of things. This job involves greenlighting and overseeing 16 investigative documentaries per TV season, and some of the best investigative journalists in the country are part of the team that makes this show. I'm the first black head of the Fifth Estate, and I've... Hello? Thank you. All right. All right, tech time. I have always worked to change who is reflected on the public broadcaster and whose views we reflect. This event and this documentary are a step in that direction. I was recently asked by a reporter why a show like ours, a legacy program, 51 years old, would cover this story, Missing Black Boys. My answer, the Fifth Estate's mandate is to pursue accountability in matters of public interest. Black boys and their families are very much part of the public, so why wouldn't we pursue this investigation? This is a story, we're gonna be here all night. This is a story every Canadian needs to see and contend with. I know I have been. Not only am I a Black woman, I'm also a mother. And like many of you, I saw the posts online in 2024. Missing boy. Pictures of young faces coupled with devastatingly young ages and similarly suspicious circumstances. I knew immediately that those boys deserve the journalistic platform this show can bring. Who was taking them and how? In the meantime, colleagues at other outlets like Emma Ansah, Camille Dundas, and Jason Miller reported on the missing boys, picking up on the alarm sounded by Shana McCalla. You will hear from all of them later this evening when I hand the mic over to our event partner, Brandon Gonez, who has also used his media brands to shine a light on the way our boys are stereotyped, lured, exploited, and criminalized. Documentaries at the Fifth Estate come together in one of two ways. Either producers pitch a story to me, or in other cases, I assign a story. This one was both. I was considering who would work on the Missing Black Boys investigation when producer-director Shelley Ayres approached me. She said she'd been following a story online for months and had already spoken with several parents of missing boys. I stopped Shelley, who you will also meet tonight, and told her I already knew the story and that we would absolutely pursue it. Shelley was joined by a team that grew to include host Mark Kelley, investigative journalist Grant LaFleche, associate producers Danielle Reid and Daisha Lopi, Canadian Journalism Foundation fellow Adriel Smiley, camera operators Usama Farag and Oliver Walters, editor Jordan Hayles, graphic designer Daniel Rafuz, senior producer Emmanuel Marchand, and many, many others who worked with passion and care for nearly a year. But this documentary and this event do not stand in isolation. Much work has been done by others before us, community organizations and media outlets campaigning, holding town halls, and amplifying. Our event partner tonight, the town of Ajax, and some of the community groups you will meet later, Generation Chosen, Durham Family and Cultural Center, the Ajax Public Library, and the Durham Region Association of Black Professionals and Entrepreneurs, among many, many others. We chose to hold this event in Ajax because the Black community in Durham Region has been at the forefront of organizing, demanding action, and pushing the legal system to recognize that our boys are children and should be treated as such. Yeah, clap for that. And the work continues. Missing Black Boys is a TV hour. That's 42 minutes. This is long when compared to social media or daily news, but it's also incredibly short. There are many issues contained in this story that could have each been their own 42-minute documentary. And for every family or story you see, there were many more whose stories we could not include for complex reasons, legal, safety, hesitation, or a combination. There is much more for a national platform like the Fifth Estate to do, and I plan to make that happen. And CBC News has also recently opened a new Durham Region Bureau. The reporters from that bureau are here tonight and are ready to hear your stories. I'd be remiss if I did not say that this documentary sits on a continuum with other work being done to both study and mend the relationship that Black communities have with the media. Professor Sherry Okeke, who was an advisor on this documentary, is conducting research at Toronto Metropolitan University about how Black interviewees are treated by journalists. And in February, advisor and Professor Nanaba Duncan of Carleton University is hosting a public day of learning in Toronto on how to ensure better reporting in Black communities. I hope that this documentary and this forum tonight are part of those conversations. I hope that the understanding that Black stories are Canadian stories becomes automatic at every news organization. Our stories should be handled with every bit of the rigor and care that all reporting should be, even and especially at legacy institutions. The missing boys and the people in their lives are at the heart of this story. We are able to bring you this documentary because of the trust they put in us. On screen, you will hear from two fathers who lived the terror of looking for their own sons, youth workers like O'Shea Stewart, who see the dangers every day, as well as men who lived the life these boys were lured into and are on the other side. Thank you for being the first to see missing Black boys. Thank you.
How's everyone doing tonight? First off, I want to say thank you all for coming out tonight. Obviously, with this crazy weather, it could have been easy to stay at home, but I know each and every one of you are so invested, not just in this story, but how to find a solution. So again, on behalf of everybody here, I know we're getting...
Wow.
Okay. And even if the audio goes off, I can take it live. But again, for some of you, you may know who I am. Just in case you don't, I am Brandon Gonez. I am the host of the Brandon Gonez Show and the CEO and founder of Gonez Media, which is Canada's fastest growing digital media company. I am so honored to be here tonight and to be your moderator. I hope everyone appreciated the documentary. And I'm gonna get into the details of the amazing team who worked so hard to put it together. But I also hope you found that while this is a difficult story that needed to be told, that this is the first step to getting to a solution, right? Before we can address a problem, we have to identify that a problem actually exists. And we did that tonight. We did that tonight. You know, the young boys and the youth that get pulled into this life, who vanish, who end up in jail, or worse, dead, I want to remind everybody that this is not a Black problem. It's a Canadian problem. And Alia said it so beautifully, that what was shown tonight puts that narrative on everybody's front door. We can't shy away from it. You can't turn a blind eye to it. It's right there front and center. And I know you all have a lot of questions, I'm sure, and we're gonna have a Q&A after our first panel. We actually have two panels that we're gonna have tonight. One is with the amazing Fifth Estate team that you see here right now. And the other is gonna be with some amazing community activists and journalists who are at the forefront of this story, telling this story, some of them for years. And they deserve to be applauded too. So let's get to the Fifth Estate team, shall we? To my left, you saw him on screen all night. Beautiful face. He's an Emmy and Canadian Screen Award-winning reporter, Mark Kelley. He's also been co-host of The Fifth Estate for the last 13 years and has covered some of the biggest news events in his 35 years at CBC News.
I'm old.
Beside Mark, we have Shelley Ayres, and she is the producer and director of this documentary. You know, she has spent years in investigative documentaries focusing on social justice issues, including a particular lens on youth. She's also produced award-winning content for CTV's W5, Discovery Channel, and now The Fifth Estate. Jordan, I'm gonna get to you, but just what I have in my notes, I have Grant next. Grant LaFleche is an investigative journalist and writer who came to The Fifth after decades in print journalism, including at the Hamilton Spectator and the Toronto Star. Jordan, when I tell you this man is talented, guys, this man is talented. His work spans genres from film to scripted television, including Run the Burbs and The Office Movers. I know a lot of people watch The Office Movers. That's Jordan, okay? And the film, The Village Keeper, which premiered at TIFF. Congratulations, my friend. Danielle Reid. Danielle is a freelance researcher and editor and was one of the associate producers on this amazing story. Great job. And lastly, Adriel Smiley is a Canadian Journalism Foundation Fellow at the Fifth Estate. This is the future of journalism right here. All right, I'm gonna get into some questions, but I wanna start off with Shelley first, because you were the producer of this documentary. And I wanna know from you, how did this story land on your desk? And what inspired you to pitch it?
Yeah.
It'll be on.
Hello.
Yep.
Well, as Alia made note in her opening remarks, I had started seeing posts about missing boys, and I saw the faces, and I didn't know that it was on their radar. And I'm older. I'm not very good with social media. I see what's important. I sometimes miss things for days. But I could not ignore these faces that were showing up on an Instagram feed. And I'm a parent. I have a teenage son who is in grade 12 and who I'm seeing his face every day. And I'm on him to get his homework done, get to school, get to his job. And I'm seeing these boys' faces who are missing, who are from this community, who are about the same age, and I see the desperation from the parents. And I just couldn't not do something. And as a journalist, stories come to us different ways, and I think sometimes it's a tip or it's a whistleblower, especially in this investigative field. This was one where I just felt like I immediately needed to start scratching the surface, and I was really grateful to connect with Shana, who I had seen at a town hall, and I started to connect with voices, and that really was the beginning. And then I was just so grateful that the show that I was working for, and Alia, that they were not only open, but supportive, because the other challenge in this industry is, many of us pitch stories all the time, and a lot of them don't ever see light. And this was supported, encouraged, and look at the team and the result. And like you've noted, it's just the beginning of coverage on this particular issue.
Mark, yeah, if you want to give that a round of applause. Mark, I know you crisscrossed the province, and you went to a lot of places many people have probably never even heard of. What did you uncover?
Well, yeah, you saw a lot of our journey, and one of the reasons we wanted to show the journey of the boys is to here was one of the biggest challenges of telling this story. We're telling a story about boys without the boys. So how do we do this justice? And we take that job very seriously about what we can do. So we try to get as much information as we can from some of the parents who told us their stories. Some of them, as you saw, told us their stories on camera. Others didn't, because these are families living in fear. So what we're up against is we're trying to tell the truth, as we're trying to shine light in some very, very dark places, is the obstacles that we have that are preventing this story from coming out, which is exactly what the gangs want. They don't want light to be shed on this. They don't want the truth coming out. And they don't want the kids to know about the truth either. Because if the kids know more about what they're signing up for, I think they're going to be thinking twice about it. And that's why we wanted to go to Thunder Bay. And that's why we wanted to go to Ganoogaming. I'd never heard of Ganoogaming in my life before I found myself driving up there in mid-December. So we really wanted to tell a story that showed a bit of the kids' journey without having the kids along for the ride. But to let people know, and I agree with you so much, this isn't a black story, this is a Canadian story. This is a story that we need to understand, because as any parent, and I have 4 boys, what we understand, all of us, is our first job and our first mission is to keep our kids safe. And that's what we want to do. And that's not happening because there's some strong, powerful forces that are pulling these kids away. So we want to shine a light on that. And I just want to take, and I know it's being said, but this story is not our story. It's your story. And we consider it such a privilege and responsibility to tell your story. And that's why we work so hard on this, to tell this story and to get it right. But work had been done before. Emma's here, Shane is here, others who had been talking about this story for a while. For us, it was like we jumped on a moving train. The train had already left the station when we climbed aboard, because we realized how important the work, and Brandon, you had done it as well, how important this work was done, and how we wanted to put it on a bigger platform, because we wanted more people to know, never mind the GTA, let's get across Ontario, let's get across the country, let's make sure that we've got politicians, police officers watching this, because it's important to get this message out there. And I'm proud we did it. I'm proud with everybody who's up on stage we worked so hard on this story. And I'm so appreciative of the people who shared their stories with us, especially the parents who spoke with us, who took a risk to do that. And I celebrate their courage and their strength.
Danielle, I know as an associate producer, you did a lot of the grunt work talking to a lot of families, hearing from them, some of them probably too afraid to come on camera. Tell us a little bit about what you heard.
I think that while Shelley and I were listening to a lot of the calls and speaking with parents, I think that a lot of the questions they were asking were why? Why would a boy want to leave his home where I give him a good life, or I provide for him and choose this or get sucked into this life? I think that we did a lot of research looking into some of the failures in the system and how Black boys have been left and what kind of gaps there were. And I think that one of the roadblocks that we kept coming up against is that there was not a lot of information about Black boys specifically. When it came to the data, it's as if Black boys did not exist. So we have a stat in the documentary about the national unemployment rate for Black youth, Black male youth. We wanted to get closer. We wanted to zero in on Black boys in Toronto, in Ontario, in Durham, and that information just wasn't there. So it's really difficult to find out why and to even address that issue when we can't even find this group among the numbers.
And this is such an important topic because without data, it's so easy to dismiss an issue, right? Is that it's in your head or you're making it up. You can't point to it. Grant, I know there's going to be a deep dive written piece about this, And I know this is frustrating for you, the lack of data sometimes that's not available.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my watchwords or watch phrases as a journalist is context is king, always. It's one thing, it's very easy to say such and such is a problem, but part of our job is to say how is it a problem, try to answer that question in this case of why. And I'm sure lots of people in this room will have already heard vaguely some statistics, right? Black boys are overrepresented in the prison system. By how much? We don't know, because while the data is recorded when those boys are incarcerated, it's not published. Black boys are suspended more in schools. Why? Don't know, because the school boards aren't asking the next questions. And the unemployment stats, which is something Danielle and I had to try to chase right up until the 11th hour in producing this, was beyond frustrating, because you heard from the lawyer, Jordan, in the documentary, who talks about how much money these kids can make if they're in these criminal networks versus, say, working a part-time job. We wanted to know, well, what is the unemployment rate? What is the actual opportunity for these kids to find jobs or not find jobs? You go to the City of Toronto website, and they have stats. And when we dug into it, we found those aren't Toronto stats. Those are national stats. And so they tell us almost nothing for the kids who live in these communities. So it's beyond frustrating, truly, because you're left kind of blindfolded throwing darts at a board. You know the bullseye is there, but either the data is not recorded, it is recorded and not shared, or it's not published because, and this is a bit of a guess on my part, but if you are not publishing data that shows systemic bias somewhere in our public institutions, you then don't have to confront the problem as the people who run those institutions.
You know, another problem is the glamorization of the lifestyle. And in the documentary, we saw the rapper Bizloke, who's in jail, and years later now saying he takes responsibility for glamorizing and is now trying to advocate for kids not to go into that lifestyle, but harm has already been done. Adriel, you secured that interview, and I know that you did that interview while he was in jail. What was that like?
Well, we talked to him once before the interview that you saw in the piece, and me and Grant were kind of dubious on how real he was about this kind of change of heart that we heard.
How real was he?
You know, Mark can attest to this. He was as real as it gets when it comes to him actually feeling what you saw in the documentary. Something that he said in our pre-interview that didn't make it in was he talked about everyone he knows who's in the life or was in the life has a job now. And he's 35 years old. He talked about all his guys that he was running with all have jobs now. And he had wished they had gotten jobs instead of doing this. And that's such a small thing, but for him to say that in his position, it kind of made me realize that he knew what he did and the influence he had on the young kids.
Influence is such a big thing, and we're all here as part of an institution called the media. And media can invoke change, but it also can sometimes inflict harm. And what I mean by that is the images that we see, for example. Who's painted across the 6 o'clock news when a politician is saying, arrest the thugs off the street? What's the first thing that comes to mind? Sometimes we forget how powerful images actually are. And Jordan, I want to come to you because as the editor, I know every image that we saw tonight, there was an intention behind it. So talk to me about that.
That's really the main word right there, intention, because the intentionality of how it's directed, produced, written, shot with our great camera operators, that all informs how I'm able to put all the pieces together in this big puzzle. But also, what I'm able to bring in the edit suite in the chair is my perspective. Me being a black man as an editor, that's already very rare in this country, in this industry, period. And then when I take my lived experiences, you know, I grew up in Toronto housing, so like, you know, this is very easy to get into. It's one way or the other. I bring all of that with me while I'm in the suite. And so when it comes to having these conversations with Shelley, with Mark, when we're going through the script, and me being able to put pieces together with context and just to educate a bit more for stuff that they may not know. It's really a big responsibility as an editor because you are a steward of these stories of real people. And I would be remiss if I was just like, no, I can't just dismiss it. I have to bring all of my knowledge, regardless of what genre that I worked on. It's the same thing. You have to be empathetic as an editor. You have to put yourself in their position because they're being vulnerable with us, so I have to treat it with so much care, regardless of what it is, but especially this. And so that's why it's my proudest work of my career so far, and I'm just very happy about it. Yeah.
Really quickly before we wrap the panel and we do some Q&A, I know we had 42 minutes, and I know for a lot of people it's like finally we're seeing the story and the layers and the context told about the story. But it still felt like I wanted more, and I know a lot of people want more. Is there, and anybody can answer this really quickly, but is there anything you wish you could have gone into a little bit more in relation to this story? And it's an open-ended question. Anybody can take it really quickly. Yeah, Adriel, take.
I think it's obviously getting one of the boys. Like that, is very obvious in this. If we had one of the boys to tell us the why that we couldn't answer for ourselves, we have, clues that we can try and piece together from the outside. We have the parents and their experience, but I think it's one of the boys. We talked to, some boys who knew some boys, but a boy who actually had been a part of this, I think would have been great to be in this piece.
And why do you think?
I think, that's a dynamic that we just don't have because, what Mark said at the beginning of showing where these kids are going, that's a huge part of the why, because it's clear these kids don't know how bad it is. No one's telling them this is where you're gonna end up, because I think if they're told that, they probably think differently. So it's finding out kind of what exactly are they told? What do they think they're getting into before they go out there? Because, something that Mark said at the top of like kids seeing this, maybe this changes their mind. I was of the same thought of like, maybe a kid will see this and that, pipe dream seems a little less glamorous. So I would have loved to hear from a kid and hear, how big was this dream that you had before you went out there?
If there's one couple things I wish we can leave a lot of people with here, and I think it's a really important point, and I've seen it before on stories that I've done over my career, but I really think it applies in this case, is we need to change the way we see these boys. They're boys. Let's not lose sight of this. These aren't adultified criminals. They are boys. We need to change the way we see these boys, and the boys need to change the way they see themselves to make sure that they know they have better options than this, and we need to work to provide those options.
Thank you, Mayor. Give it up to the Fifth Estate team here. Thank you all for all the hard work that you did. We're going to open up the floor now to some Q&A. We have about 10 minutes for that. We have a mic that's going to go around. And can you state your name and where you're from, and then ask your question, sir?
As in where I was born?
No.
Just kidding.
You're giving me Jamaican vibes based off of that answer.
My name is Anthony Nemhard. I reside here in Durham. We saw a lot of the boys' stories, but what we didn't see is who was at the top of the hierarchy? Like, who was running these boys? Why didn't we get a perspective from that end?
Well, if you think it's hard to get the boys to talk. No, I don't want to poke fun. As Adriel was saying, what more would we like to bring? We want to hear the boys' story. We want to find out more about the people who recruit these boys. Because what we've learned in the research is that it's usually a boy who was recruited who ends up recruiting another boy. It's this hierarchy that was referred to. So as you start to age out, meaning you're over 18 and now you're subject to a different set of laws now, or a different set of punishment that can come in here. You want to find these boys, so that's what they're doing. So there is that hierarchy that's working, and we would love to be able to crack it. But listen, if you think it's hard to get some of the people who are involved in this story to talk to us because they have so much fear of retribution, the same goes for these gangs. And that's what we were trying to find. And Shelley started before I did on this story. I've been working on this story for 8-9 months. And we were trying to get it just that, to get a better insight into how it worked. And the closest we got was with Biz Loke, who gave us an idea of his own journey. But getting at that is very, very difficult because there is a culture of fear that permeates this lifestyle, and that gives them cover, and it gives them shelter, and allows this problem to perpetuate, and that's part of the problem that we're up against.
I just want to add one thing, and I want the community to be aware that we are trying, and that there are a lot of instances, even in the making of this, where we have threads, we have names, we have locations, we have detention centers where we know some of these actors are. Some of them are 18, some of them are 24, some of them are 45. So we're working on that, and we'll hopefully have more to share when we find them. But we're tracking license plates that are bringing boys into communities like Ganukaming. All of these things aren't unnoticed by us. Those are the little crumbs that are left for us that we're like, oh, we got to get that. Or we find out that police have put a tap in a car, and we're like, we've got to get that recording because there's something there. So we're trying, and we'll keep trying, but we wanted to get this story out there so that more awareness can be shared.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Crawford. I'm a regional counselor in the town of Ajax. And one thing that I noticed was absent, perhaps on purpose, was the lack of talking about police involvement in this. And so given that it seems like a large portion of the missing black boys come from Durham region, how open or were you able to get any kind of interview from the Durham Regional Police on this? Maybe this is part 2 of the documentary, I'm not sure, but I am curious.
You think it's hard getting the boys to talk. You think it's hard getting the gangs to talk. You try getting the police to talk.
I know what the answer is to this. I want to know if you were able to secure any kind of information or interview. I mean, I saw Thunder Bay Police were open to talking. I think I saw an broad interview from Toronto Police. I only saw the building of Durham Region Police.
You'll notice that all eyes on this end of the room all turned here. Part of my job on the team is try to secure some of those interviews that you're talking about, the institutional interviews. We did reach out to every GTA police service multiple times. Ultimately, the statement we got from Toronto Police that you saw on screen came quite late, but Durham Police did not even really answer our request for an interview. So the short answer to your question is no. We tried multiple times, and mostly we were met with silence.
I want to add to that. I'm not on the Fifth Estate team. I'm moderating this panel, so I can speak just also a little bit more freely here to everybody in this room. That when we are talking about institutions like police, we all must remember that they are taxpayer-funded institutions. So you are all paying for the service of protection. So while I'm not going to end the sentence there, it is still incumbent that it's a responsibility that if you're not hearing the answers that you want and media are not getting those answers, you then have to show up at that police board meeting and make your voices heard. It can't just stop here.
I'll give you the dates.
And the regional counselor is right here. So I just want to make sure that it doesn't stop here, right? And it's not fair that certain communities, especially the black community, has to fight extra hard for that respect, but we still got to get it done. And then once it's done, you don't take your foot off the gas. Okay, next question. I just wanted to make sure I got that out.
Hi, good night. My name is Roxanne Francis, and I am a social worker and psychotherapist. I live and work in Durham Region. And I was wondering if, while you were doing this documentary, if you had the opportunity to talk to any of the parents about any mental health support that they received, or even the boys who came home, if they were able to access any of that, because what these people are going through is trauma. And I'm wondering if they're getting any supports after having lived through this.
Well, the one thing I can speak to is I've had an ongoing dialogue with some of the families who have had boys who have gone through the experience, and it's a long road. As to whether they're getting the support that they need, that's a very nuanced question that I don't really feel comfortable answering. But what I will say is that I think it's very frustrating navigating the system where when this happens, if the boys are located and are arrested and are facing kind of youth justice path, incredibly hard for them to access some of the resources that they need. And for the boys that are located at the ages of 13, 14, are coming back and having to reintegrate into school and into programs, I think it's immensely hard. And so, I mean, that is a very good question. And I think, I don't want to speak to what's available or what's not, because I don't know, but from the very kind of small survey of the parents that we engaged with for this story, it's a difficult road at a time, and I was saying this earlier to someone, we all know what COVID, what that was like for youth in this age group. And I feel like these experiences are like imposing this pause at such a critical time. And on top of that, the trauma of what they're experiencing out there. And they need support, absolutely.
I think we have time for one last question. Let's give it to this gentleman over here.
That gentleman there.
Yeah.
My name's Jason. I don't really have a question, but I would like to say a special thanks to Shana, a special thanks to Shelley for this documentary. I actually came across this on your post on the 5 missing black boys. And I just want to say that there's a lot of parents here. All of us come from a Caribbean background. You might feel ashamed. You might feel alone. Don't be quiet about this. We're a community, and everyone needs to work together to solve this problem. This won't be solved by the police. They obviously have shown that they don't care, right? So we have to make it a very concern on our part. Someone goes missing, contact a neighbor, speak to someone else. They might know someone you can get in contact with, someone else that you could talk to that might be able to help. One of the main things is that if you have a young boy, you have to be watching them, because this internet and social media makes people feel like this is an overnight thing. It's a success overnight. Man has a Lambo, man's doing streaming, he's making this money, he's doing this. I could get rich overnight. That's how they get lured into this thing. You see a new pair of Jordans come into your house that you never bought. You see a new shirt come into your house that you never bought. You have to be watching these things. They're getting it from somewhere. Nothing is cheap, and everybody knows everything is super expensive. A hoodie is $120. Where are you getting Jordans for $350 if you're 15 and you don't have a job? Where is it coming from if you didn't buy it? This is the things you have to watch, because they start them in small things. They start selling phones, they start doing little things like this, and then they become targeted, and that's how they get lured to these places. So everybody here is here for whatever reason, but please, we need to come closer together and talk about these things so that our children don't go missing anymore. And I just want to say thank you.
I so appreciate that point, and that's exactly what we're going to hear more from our next panel, where we have community activists, local journalists, who will have a deeper knowledge of how this is all being orchestrated as well. But we're going to take a 15-minute break. Before we do so, just one last round of applause for our Fifth Estate team. Thank you, guys. And again, because you said it's mostly Caribbean people in here, a quick 15-minute break. Okay. I love you guys. All right, everybody feeling good? I gave you 17 minutes. That's how nice I am. Amazing. We got some patties, got some water. Awesome. I want to thank you all for continuing to stay with us because we have another esteemed panel here, which I'm really, really eager and excited to talk with. As we all know, we are dealing with a very, very complex issue that is going to be equally complex to find solutions for. Full black panel. And we ain't even in February yet.
Touche.
No, don't get me started. Is the mic on? No, but honestly, are you guys? I'm glad we can smile because we're gonna get into some heavy conversation here. But I want to introduce you to these wonderful people because they've been doing so much work, the grunt work. They're at the forefront of this storytelling. Some folks on this stage doing this for numerous years. But let me start off with Emma Ansah. She has been reporting on the missing boys story as a Canadian correspondent for the African Diaspora News Channel. She also reports for Emancipation Media and a few others. Plus, her stories center around what shapes lives, the Black experience, systemic injustice, and the constant fight for equity. Please give a round of applause. Right to my left, we have the amazing Camille Dundas. She is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Canada's largest Black online magazine, byblacks.com. Okay. Not only has she been awarded multiple media awards, she's also been named among the top 100 Black Canadian accomplished women. All right. Up next, we got O'Shea Stewart. Yes. O'Shea leads O's Elevated Minds, a not-for-profit initiative focused on youth empowerment. As you saw towards the end of the documentary, O'Shea literally has real-life experience in the world our boys are being lured into, and we are so excited to have you here today. Jason Miller is a reporter for the Toronto Star. Yes, you can give him a round of applause. Jason has tackled many difficult yet important issues involving crime and justice in the Peel region and across the GTA. And of course, before I get on to Shana, one more round of applause for Jason. Doing all the amazing work at the Toronto Star. And of course, so many of you know Shana McCalla. And I think if there's one person who deserves a standing ovation, that's Shana. So please.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And just in case you don't know who Shana is, I will just say she's the founder of Find Ontario Missing Boys, a growing community-led initiative bringing national attention, hence why we are all here, to the disappearance, exploitation, and systemic neglect of missing Black boys across Ontario. We only have so much time on this panel, but I know there is a very, very important why for each and every single one of you as to why you pursued this story, even in the dark times, the hard times, when no one else would listen. So I want to ask each of you, why? What is your why? Camille, I'll start with you.
Well, I kept getting tagged in the stories on social media. I saw Emma's, I saw Shana's, and at first I thought, no, this feels just like too much. I don't know if we have the resources at Buy Blacks to handle this story with the care it deserves. And then I started seeing the comments, and Shana can speak to this as well. There are like sort of two camps of comments that are very concerning. One camp that normalizes what's happening as, oh, they're just gonna do X, Y, Z, it's fine, this is what happens. And the other extreme, where I was seeing lots of wild conspiracy theories brewing, such as they're taking these children for organ harvesting, they're being kidnapped off the street. Not to say that those things don't ever happen, but that is certainly not what was happening here. And so for me, the pursuit of the truth was my why. I'm like, somebody has to be there to inform our community as to what is actually happening. We may not like the answers, but we have to pay attention to the answers. I also have a 14-year-old son. I live in Durham. The personal why was a difficult one for me because I realized that I was also in the camp of Black parents in the suburbs who felt very safe, who spent part of their childhood in Scarborough, you know, and we're like, okay, we go and get out of here sometime. We worked hard, and now we live in our nice little house in Whitby, and our kids go to swimming and soccer and music lessons, and we're good. Those things don't happen to us. And that is a bubble that I had to pop for all of us. Because, as I said before, this devil is at our door, and we have to understand what is facing us if we are going to even move the dial at all.
Shana.
The why is a layered question and answer for me. A lot of people ask me why. Do I care? And I sometimes get perturbed because I just wonder why nobody else cares. It should be obvious. I am a mother. I have a daughter who's now an adult, actually. And I have a lot of cousins who have sons. But despite that, when I saw the faces that Emma shared, and before that, weeks before that, a friend of mine who lives in Durham, he's a single father, he works really hard to raise his son on his own, 15-year-old son at the time. And he said, Shana, why are so many boys missing from Durham, same age as my son, and nobody's talking about it? You know, this is a single father wondering why, and it could be his son. So for me, the why is layered. And I can share a close personal story as well. A friend of mine whose sister, and I shared it with Mark earlier in the green room, 2 years ago went into labor in a trap house. And these are the same trap houses where our boys are and shouldn't be. And that my best friend had to go into the trap house and find her sister having contractions, and she busted down the bathroom door and pulled her sister out of that trap house and got her to the hospital in time to save that baby. So the answer to why is layered for me. Yeah.
Moshe.
The why for me is I've shared some of the same lived experiences of a lot of these youth, right? I've been shot at, I've been stabbed, I've been incarcerated, I've been influenced by gang activity, and I've been OT. So who better to connect with these youth than me? I understand them. You know, I come from a marginalized community. And so I try to connect with them through just my own lived experience, and that's my why. To see where I am today, that's big. And so I look at it and I say, okay, if I can do it and some of my friends around could do it, they can do it too as well, right? So there has to be a positive because there's too many negatives in our community. And so that starts with me and the circle of friends I have around me.
Go ahead, Emma.
For me, it was when I started looking or noticing it, it was in October of 2024. And I would see one black boy, then 2 days later, 3, 4, 5. And then I'm looking at the ages, 14, 15, 16. And then I see 12. So by December, I said, I need to shed light on this. This is a problem. So for me, I identified it as a problem. Because when you think back to, well, I'm about to date myself, but growing up in the 60s, 70s, 14-year-olds, 12-year-old black boys were outside playing. They're at school, they're at the mall, they're doing normal things that boys that age would do. So when I'm seeing all of these boys missing, I started asking questions. And so you hear in the documentary, I'm saying, why are they all missing? What are the police doing? So, asking the questions without really knowing what's going on. So I just felt a responsibility to shed light on it. So that was my why.
I think personally for myself, as a crime and justice reporter at the Toronto Star, what really impressed me was how the community rallied at the time. And seeing Brandon and Emma and Shana and Camille and everyone just kind of talking about this issue. And I looked around the Star newsroom and I said, this one has to land on my shoulders in a sense of a person who understands the issue, being born and raised in Jamaica, understanding the community and the objectivity that is required to cover this story in a thorough way. And so I just set off on the mission and had the fortune and the opportunity to interview some of the same parents, other parents as well, to tell this story. And to see it materialize tonight with this gathering is fulfilling.
Thank you.
Brandon, before you go on to the next question, I think it's actually really important to point out that one group we haven't really touched on is the parents of these missing boys. The only reason any of us heard about this, the only reason we're here is because they had the courage to go to social media to post about their children. And someone raised that earlier in the audience, but that is a big deal because as we know, you don't air no dirty laundry no way, right? That's how we've grown. And so for those parents to take that step, that's the only reason that we're here. So I want us to remember that we have to keep speaking out and not being afraid about that.
And that's such a great point because it does take courage, right? Because there's a fear of judgment, a fear of failure, and nobody failed, right? I think we also have to put into context that these kids are being lured. And any child could be susceptible to this. But for some reason, it's black boys that are being hyper-targeted. So I'm gonna open up the floor because all of you guys have done such amazing work in looking into this story, firsthand experience. So what did you uncover as to why are black boys being hyper-targeted here? And anybody can take it.
Yeah, the boys are targeted, black boys specifically, because the people that take these boys, the human traffickers, they know that nobody cares, nobody's looking, there's no urgency. All of these things are true. And that's why they're highly targeted, because they're not considered valuable in the eyes of some people, quite frankly, and that's part of the reason I shared their faces, and I'm glad that in a few days I reached over 10 million people, and then this has become it's an epidemic, it's a crisis, and it's a personal attack on our community, not just the black community, but public safety is at risk. Children's lives are at risk, and as adults, and as a society, it is up to us to protect our children, and there's no way in this world I will allow for people to target our kids and get away with it without there being some type of justice for these families.
In the last Q&A, the last panel, a lot of you were left wondering, what is the police doing? Why aren't they doing more? They know where some of the producer was saying, we know where some of these people are, et cetera. And it's clear to us that it is not the lack of resources or knowledge to help solve this problem. It is the lack of will. And the fact that we are stonewalled so often when we're trying to get the police to, and the police are very familiar with Shana's face because she be all up in their face all the time, right? And we need 100 more Shanas. I urge you to read, it was a 3-part series that I did on By Blacks about this. I urge you to read especially the 3rd part, because that is where we looked into the education system and family life. And I want you to really think about, I want you to, when we talked, the other panel talked about the lack of data, right? What came to mind was we have a lot of data in our community, but people don't want to value or listen to that data. We have community knowledge. We have several O'Sheas who can tell you their lived experience and what they are hearing on the ground. The article, the 3rd part of the article, the 3rd part of the series that I interviewed people for, they are speaking to teachers and to Black children in schools. There are advocates, there are navigators, and they're telling me statistics that I can't find on the internet. They're telling me that when a white child acts out at school, they are likely to get a mental health referral. But a Black child is 4 times more likely to get a mental health referral from the emergency department. That's how Black children enter the mental health system. When they are, it's a crisis situation, right? And so there's something also called misafropedia. It is a fear of Black children. And what these navigators are telling me is that when they interview white teachers, they are surprised that they admit that they are afraid, they have an inherent fear of a Black boy. And they are okay with that, seeing that Black boy withdraw and stay at the back of the class. They're more comfortable with that because they're just afraid of him. And so I want you to think about what that does to the psyche. Mark was talking about the boys need to see themselves differently. So I want you to think about how they see themselves now. When you are the star basketball player, everybody at school loves you. The principal is buying you lunch. They're making sure you eat. They're making sure you got this, you got that. Once you got cut from that team, you're a nobody, because we have very limited views of what a successful Black boy can look like. And so I can go on about this forever, but there are so many entry and exit points, is what I'm saying, that lead these children to be more vulnerable to this type of luring. So sorry, it took a long way to answer the question, but that is why Black boys are more vulnerable to being lured in this way.
You know, hearing Shana say it stems from the fact that society just did not care. Hearing Camille say value is only built through a limited prism, it leads me to believe that the word that we're looking for is disposable. And that's so tragic. So, sorry. That's so tragic when you really think like kids should never be disposable. O'Shea, I know you've been in the circumstance, so give us a firsthand perspective of how did you find yourself in that situation? And was there anything the community could have done to protect you from that?
No, because I grew up around it. I just grew up in it, and it's all around me. And my mom was like a great mother, very strict, very strict. She didn't let me get away with anything, right? Sometimes I felt like I lived in a jailhouse. She'd flip my beds, everything, right? She's always going through my stuff. A gentleman said that, when your kids come through the house with things that don't belong to them, looking on, that my mom was that mom. However, the community that I grew up in, there was so much crime going on. And there was some bullying going on and stuff like that, because I was often just like a quiet kid, came from a good household, It was a single mom household, but she did everything she could do. And I had to grow a tougher skin. And through growing that tougher skin, it was fights, it was challenges within the neighborhood, and there was gang activity, and you had to choose. It's either you're on this side, or you're in the middle. And if you're in the middle, you're getting eaten, right? And so I picked a side, and I just had to roll with what was being offered. And that just, it led me into a lot of situations where like I inflicted some of my own trauma upon me, as well as a community inflicting trauma upon me. And you know, it was tough. It was really tough. There was no way of getting out of that. It's either I was in the streets or I tried to go to school, but I didn't think that I would amount to be any more than what I am today, because that influence wasn't around. It was drug dealers. It was guys in and out of jail. My own stepfather was a drug dealer. And so I would often see, you know, people come to the house, buy weed and stuff like that. I didn't quite understand what was going on at the time until I was in it myself. And so you think that lifestyle's okay because it's all around you. I think the only thing that made me understand that it wasn't okay is that my mom didn't send me to the public school. She sent me to the Catholic school. And at the time, this Catholic school was predominantly all white kids. And I seen the life that they were living, and they'd invite me to their houses and stuff like that. And I would eat dinner at a table with them, and I'd be like, this is different. I wouldn't mind living this house. Living this life. I want to buy a house. You know what I mean? I want to be a father to kids, right? So I got to see this white picket fence, and I think that was always in the back of my head that allowed me to gravitate to the right way, and I didn't get caught up in it. But not everybody gets to look at life that way.
Thank you for sharing that, because that was vulnerable. But it seemed like what you experienced at that Catholic school was just a higher level of expectation of what you're called to do.
Yes, yes.
And I wonder, and again, this is open to the entire panel, who bears the responsibility of not expecting more and making sure that our boys are continuously being pulled up and called to be to who they're meant to be?
Yeah, we're all responsible for that. And I one of the first 13, by December 2024, there were 13 boys missing. And after the post went viral, families started reaching out. And then, of course, I met people in person at the town halls. But I believe that we're all responsible for these boys, especially the ones that have fallen all the way through the cracks. One of the first 13 ended up making headlines in 2025. And most of you saw his face all over social media. I feel like there was a neighbor that I reached out to, that I spoke to, who said he was a good kid. He used to, when she came home with a car full of groceries, he would run across and he would help her, and he'd bring groceries into the house. And this boy had a teacher, he had principals, he had neighbors, he had a family, he had so many people that crossed his path before he made headlines. And it was devastating to see his face across CP24 after sharing his missing flyer 6-7 months before that. So I think it's everyone's responsibility.
You know, an elder in the community said something to me once that I'll never forget. He said that the burden of low expectations is almost as harmful as direct racism. And I sat with that. And one of the navigators I interviewed for the article told me they do these sort of listening circles with Black male youth. And they asked one of the youth, what do we get wrong about the Black boy experience? And he said, how can I matter 1 minute and then the next minute I'm nothing? And that was heartbreaking, because what he's speaking to is that, what he did further speak to is that when he finds that when he or another Black kid make a mistake, that's all people see. And he said, in his words, some kids cannot shake that. it follows you. And that tracked with the interviews I did with the parents of one of the missing boys, where the mom said to me that when her son was, going through a depression, one of his friends had been killed, he started hanging out with the wrong crowd, as she said. He hadn't gotten into anything as yet, but the teachers would bully him in the hallway. And maybe they thought they were giving some type of tough love, but they would say to him, oh, you're a weed head like those kids, you're gonna end up like them. And so he started getting that, being like stereotyped this way. And once you sort of, and as we all know, when you enter a workplace or any type of new setting, whatever, that's gonna follow you, whatever the stereotype people put you in. Now I want you to think of one of these boys who are sitting in jail right now. And they might not be calculating the cost, but I calculate the cost. That it's just by simple Google, you can find out that it costs our government, federally, $73,000 per year to house a prisoner, provincially about $93,000. And is anyone thinking to themselves, what if that $93,000 was put to use for me when I was outside of prison? Why aren't I worth that? Why am I worth that behind bars, but I am not worth that outside? And then what does that do to you?
So many systems just seem to be failing the boys, whether it's education, law enforcement, media at times. I know so many people are probably sitting here wondering, well, then how do we fix this? And I know that question in and itself is beyond complex. But where do you think we start?
I think for my reporting over the last several months of picking up this issue around last year this time and started to report on numerous stories. And I know the Fifth Estate, because of the setup of their documentary, didn't get as much information from the police, but I spent most of last year talking to multiple police agencies and multiple people. I'm sorry, I didn't even get a chance to talk to Shay. It would have been a great interview, but Deputy Chief Patterson, Toronto Police, Peel Police, Durham Regional Police as well. And what I do know at this point, we've gone a year of this, right? We've gone a year of telling them there are gaps. We've gone a year of identifying these issues. We've gone a year of telling, through my reporting and the reporting of my colleagues and the reporting of Fifth Estate, simple things like the alert systems to let people know what young people and where they are missing, are not robust enough in this country, which is unfortunate. We have a Amber Alert system that only goes out if it's an abduction. And speaking to the Missing Persons Association, they were noting to me that we had a report, I think, a year ago of 32,000 reports, missing reports. Only 35 of those went out through the rescue app alert system, which is still being developed. It's not as effective as it should be, which shows you that it's a significant gap. It's happening right now and we don't even know about it. And if people like the folks up here and within this community don't post to their Instagrams, don't call the news reporters and say, this should be a story, it doesn't get told, it doesn't go anywhere. But fortunately for us, we spent a year of great advocating, reporting, and community rallying, and raised awareness around this. And we are going to see, I'm going to be asking these questions of the police and of these agencies, what has changed? What systems have you put in place? Have you started to track this data? Have you started to look into these issues? And that's where kind of my focus for 2026 as a journalist at the Toronto Star is to continue to beat the door. And there needs to be change, and we're gonna have to stand by this one and ensure that it happens. And it's a hard question to answer, and I don't even have the answer right now, but I'm gonna be asking questions to try to continue to shine light on this issue. And we're here, we're at that moment right now. And I feel that if we continue on this path, We have to get that change. We have to get new systems in place. The police need to look at this as a focus, a priority. They say it is, and that's an out front of it kind of statement to be provided to a reporter to reproduce, but we need to see that intangible change, and I think that's where, as a community, we have to stick by it, and the families have made the sacrifice to tell the stories, and we're gonna have to continue the hard work to make sure that they get those answers.
Yeah, and that's a deep responsibility for media of all kinds, and that really is the power of media, right? Because it can invoke that type of change, but it also can frame the narrative, right? And Emma, I want to go to you because I know you were one of the first to frame this as not boys who are selling drugs. These were boys who were lured and abducted. And that's a whole different way of looking at things, right? Like, that's the power of messaging. So Emma, talk to me about that. And how did that change things for this story?
Well, again, when I first covered it and I heard missing, that was the first thing that came to my mind, is that they were abducted. Because when you hear missing, you just think, okay, if somebody's missing, it's because they've been taken. That was the first thing that came to my mind. But then once learning that, they're being lured, and learning as much as I've learned, including, I have to say again, huge thank you to CBC, The Fifth Estate, for this documentary, because there's so much more that I learned here. And one of the things that really landed on me in this documentary was when we were talking about law enforcement, and we're talking about, in my mind, I'm thinking we got to cut off the head of the snake, right? Because these people are being lured by adults, and they're being, once they're found, everybody's being arrested, but what are we really doing to address these young boys that are being lured? And when I heard in the documentary that the police are saying, unless these boys are willing to testify, there's nothing we can do. We need to change that law. That's the first thing, that we need to change that law that says that you can't do anything really unless these young boys are willing to speak. If you hear that these young boys are so afraid to speak, then the problem is the law. So that was one of the things for me that really landed on me in this documentary, and I think to tag into what Jason is saying, we need to also lean on law enforcement to get that changed as well. Because we need to be able to address the main issue that's getting these boys where they are. So that was one of the things that really, for me, I feel like we have to work on. And then, of course, our community, I do feel like one of the things I said in my initial report is that we as a community, if we see something, we should say something, right? Like when I go back again, I'm about to date myself again, but back in my day, auntie across the street would be looking out for us, and uncle on the other side would be like, get your behind home when the lights went out. So we as a community also need to be looking out for our youth as well. So those are the things that came to mind.
I'll just add to that law enforcement doesn't change laws. Law enforcement is hired to uphold laws. So this lies with us. Political action changes laws. So when you're asking what next, what do we do, I want you to look back on where you voted and how you voted. I want you to look back on what community meetings did you attend? Do we even know who our local counselor is? Do we know who the school trustee is, if there's still any left? These are the things that we need to think about, right? It's easy for us to sort of target the police officers and, okay, but they are just there to uphold, and that ain't gonna change. That's their job. That's the systemic part, but in our part, we have to be our brother's keeper, literally. I saw a video, you may have seen this video on social, of a group of men from a different community. I think it was in London. And his niece or daughter or sister was being trafficked by an older man. And I would say that at least 100 men, I don't know where he found all these men from their community neighborhood, showed up at this man's door and did not stop banging on that door until the sister came out. I've spoken to a Black mother who made the difficult choice, whose son went through this, and she decided not to bail him out of prison. And that wasn't even the most heartbreaking thing she told me in that interview. The most heartbreaking thing she told me was that I was struggling with him, and I went to my brother, I went to my uncle, I went to my male cousin, and none of them would help me. It's not my business. Oh, that's your fault. Oh, who, oh. And I want you to think of how many times you may have inadvertently done that, or you may have turned a blind eye to that, or been afraid. Many times I've been afraid to call my neighbor and be like, hey, I saw your son, and now I don't hesitate. And all the other parents on the street, they know even if I see their son, they're not looking suspicious, I still gonna call you and say, hey, I see your child on this, just so you know that I'm gonna tell you. And we have to get over this whole shaming thing and get back to, if you had any experience growing up in any Caribbean island, that's how our mothers rolled. Before you get back home, they already know what you did. And we have to get back, right? Lick's waiting for you. So we have to get back to some element of that village.
I love what you said there about being each other's keeper. I think for, our community in particular, who are still relatively newcomers, but, now moving on to first, second gens, understanding how to be involved in these systems takes time because they're different from maybe where you came from. But now that we know how these systems work, we know how school board meetings work, we know how police board meetings work, we know the power of voting. Like, these are the ways where you have to make sure you make your voices heard and you put your stamp saying that I'm watching. Because that's what every community does. That's what every community does. And when I said that word disposable, it really got me emotional, because unless you are actively making sure these systems know that our kids are not disposable, that's the only way. Exactly. We're gonna get to a Q&A, but before we get to that Q&A, I do wanna give Shana the last word here. What is it that you wanna see changed?
As I said in the documentary, I want to see that the predators, essentially, that are preying on our kids and on our communities, that they're held accountable. I am working towards that, and those of you that follow me or follow Find Ontario Missing Boys know that I've been to Queen's Park and I've met with several mayors. I'm constantly meeting with authorities. I'm actively working on cases right now. Some of these boys don't have missing flyers, so you're not going to see their faces on the Instagram for safety reasons. I've been able to get some changes in how our boys are treated when found, and that's been a weight off my shoulders and a weight off the shoulders of some of the families that I'm currently working with. But I ultimately, I'm not going to stop, and I'm currently working on a brief, which is not very brief, for the Solicitor General, who oversees the police, right? So this is a long document that is going to essentially talk about what I've learned over the past year, just over a year now, working with families and traveling to Thunder Bay and to Sarnia and Aurelia, really boots on the ground. And also I want to acknowledge the committee, because people think, how are you doing this all by yourself? But I have a small committee of community members, and this year we're expanding. So if you wish to join the Find Ontario Missing Boys Committee, I encourage you to reach out to me. We meet via Zoom, so you don't have to bear the weather. But these women and 2 men are from different backgrounds professionally, and they all bring a wealth of knowledge, and they're situated around the GTA. So we're growing in numbers and we're growing in power, and we're gonna ensure, like Camille says, that these policies are changed, and there's victim services provided to our boys when they're found. And that proper resources are provided to the families, because once I do locate their boys, or the police locates the boys, they need a lot. The families need a lot of support. The boys need a lot of support. So I'm working on all of that, and so if you'd like to get involved, I'd be happy to speak with you. And thank you to Shelley and the Fifth Estate team, because Shelley and I have been through the mud and back this year, and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears has gone into the efforts to help these boys. So thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. Thank you for all the hard work that you've been doing and continue to do. We're now going to open the floor to a brief Q&A session. I know there's a lot of people who have some questions. So just put your hands nice and high for me. Already, we have right here in the middle. And if you can just state your first name and just tell us where you're from.
Sonia from the Durham region. Thank you for the work that you do. I think we know how hard it is, how exhausting it is, so thank you. Camille, you had raised the point about the education system and the concerns with educators. So I'm an educator, I work in the education system, and I want to know, how can educators, school boards, unions, associations in the education system come together to support? What can be done? What suggestions? Just how can education support what's happening?
I would suggest putting together our own gang. Literally, like a task force that is specifically for this issue. I would love to see a group of Black educators who put together a specific task force and are going school. One of the things that I was frustrated by the most when I was interviewing for this series, I'll tell you, I went in with an anti-police bias, I have to tell you, because of just who I am. And every time I interviewed a police officer, I'm like, why are they so nice? Why is he so encouraging? And he was like giving me all these really interesting, encouraging answers. Not to say all of them are like that, but I was like, huh. And he is one of the officers who goes school to school to do presentations on, and what floored me is that the officer in Thunder Bay who I spoke to and the Toronto police officer I spoke to, they are fully on board and using the word trafficking, that these boys are being trafficked. I didn't have to convince them. That was my first thing to get over. And then I asked him, how many of these presentations have you done in 1 year? And it was like less than 30 or something. And they set up this, basically he's like almost retired. They gave him this little pet project to do, but they didn't fund it as well it should be funded. So now we need to figure out, okay, how can we be going and making these presentations? How can we get people like O'Shea to come and talk to these kids in the school? What is also heartbreaking is that some of the people in the doc were saying, if these kids could hear from somebody who'd been through it, maybe it would change. And it doesn't change. Hearing somebody doesn't change their mind from going into that. What changes their mind is another option. And I was so glad that you had that lawyer talking about that. Because without that other option, we can talk all you want. You can be from, a strict mom, a mom who's looking after you, but without the option, it doesn't matter. And so I want to see Black educators coming together to advocate for those options and for specific training for teachers to be able to spot the signs of these things before these kids get in too deep.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to that. So a while back, maybe in 2020, the board that I work for, they got in trouble because there was a high suspension and dropout rate for Black youth. So when that happened, I work on a special team. We were getting a lot of training and just education on what was going on. So they activated my team and they said, you know, we're going to be working with a lot of Black youth. So typically, the team that I work on, I am the last level of support. So after these kids have been suspended in suspension programs and excluded, they would activate my team. Unfortunately, my team is only a team of 4 people for both Peel and for all of Peel, right? And Peel's pretty big. We extend to Bolton and Caledon. So we're expected to serve all these kids. However, funding is always cut. And so we're stretched. I'm pulled at every limb. And every tough case there is, unfortunately, they call me to do it, right? And so I think, you know, the boards, they need to really, put together these teams and call for more funding, but also show the data of what, you know, EAs like myself are doing. And thank God for my superintendent. She's very great at advocating for Black youth. She needs to give me a pay raise, but but she does great. She does great.
Thank you so much. And for you who are bubbling up this issue to the cockpit, doing it more and more. I'm here. Yeah. Thank you so much for what you're doing. And I'm Leroy Clark, and I'm from the Durham region. I'm also an educator, and I know that there are educators here in the audience, and there's a lot that we can do. What are some of the issues with our Black boys? I work in the area of mentoring, and I find that sometimes there are difficulties competing with sports and getting youth involved. It's a difficult. Parents have a role to play here as well, because talking to students alone, it's hard. But if parents are working together with us, it would make a whole lot of difference. So I see parents are here. Please join in and make things happen for your children. Because unless you work together, it's not going to happen. We need to pull together and make it happen for our Black youth. So thank you so much. Keep on doing what you're doing, and we'll support you in the best possible way. What I want to say is, what would you want to see? I thought there might be a sign-up sheet or something. There's nothing like a captive audience to say, what are you going to do tonight? What is the next step that you want to see happen? I know, Shana, you have mentioned connect with me and so on, but you have a captive audience here tonight. Is there a sign-up sheet? This is what we need to do. How do we get you there? Thank you.
So I will say we are going to have a few community organizations who are present that are going to come on the stage after and also share some resources that you can tap into. But is there anything that anybody on this panel wants to direct the audience? I have a few things, but Shana, go ahead first.
I just want to talk to the educators in the room real quick. I am doing a school tour, so I'm going to be visiting the schools that are targeted through my work with the families. There are specific schools that are being targeted around the GTA, and if you're a teacher at these schools, you need to be on high alert. If you are a teacher and you see kids in your classroom 13, 14, 15 years old, and they're missing back-to-back for extended periods of time, and they're all the same age range, that is a red flag. So the teachers, or you're at the front line, your frontline workers, the social workers, the teachers, the principals, everyone that's working inside the school. This is a target for these people. Go to the schools looking for these kids, right? So I do plan on doing a school tour, and I will be providing pamphlets and educational pieces there as well to teachers to help them, because teachers have been reaching out to me across the country with that need help. So I will be providing that, and I'll keep you guys posted on when those tour dates will be and on social media.
And before we go to the next question, I just want to add just on to that, and I know I've been preaching it, but maybe at the end of this, parents here in Durham, I don't live in Durham, I lived in Toronto, but from the west side, but But I will say this, again, it goes back to change happens at the local level. I know a lot of times national consumes the conversation. Who are you voting for prime minister, whatever. But change happens at the local level. So maybe at the end of this, if there's a commitment to every parent, at least one parent's gonna attend every school board meeting. And there's gonna get a commitment that a parent here is gonna join the parent advisory committee at your school. And then there's gonna be a commitment that at least one person in this room will attend the police board meeting every single month. And the city council meeting every single month. And the Durham regional meeting, because you also have that level of bureaucracy. That's where it starts. Because when you step in the room and you sit down and you say, as a community, these boys are not disposable, it has to start there. And then you report back.
And also right before that, talk to your child.
And then there's
Watch this documentary with your child. Invite your nephews, all of the boys in your family or in your circle, watch this with them. Hold viewing parties, hold whatever it is in your living room, in your community, in your church. I'm sure CBC will be willing to give whatever resources they need to help you do that. So, but we can't just tell people, hey, watch this online. Like, treat it like it's, you gotta watch this and then talk about it afterwards, in schools, and everywhere. Yes, absolutely.
And it is gonna be available online, so it's gonna be easily accessible. So many of us have internet access, so there's no excuses. We have time for one last question. You have to raise your hand all the way up in the air if you want it. Okay, I see you, we've made eye contact. All right, girl, you can get it.
We have this one
I'm
too.
sorry, we're gonna have to give it over here. Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you again. My name is Joy Laps-Lewis, and I'm here as my sister Asha Laps' representative. She leads the Black Queens of Durham, and they have a really strong... But I wanted to just highlight, so they have over about 14,000 Black women in Durham, beyond, and I think they've shown that there's a lot of work that we can do collectively, and I think there's been a lot of advice here about what we can do, just different advice about what we can do in our communities. But I guess I wanted to ask two questions about two things that I've seen are this feeling of, like, I grew up in Ajax. My parents moved out here in 1987. I worked for the town of Ajax, and I found that there was this feeling of, like, you moved out of town, and Camille kind of alluded to it. You moved out here, you have your 2-car garage, your kids are in university, and it's this kind of, I've made it, so I don't need to worry about everybody else. And so I want to ask, what is the message that you would send to community about how we can, especially if our kids have been able to not be pulled in or lured into these things, like, how can we support each other? And what would you say to us as, an organization like the Black Queens of Durham, to churches? What can you say about how can we talk about that feeling of being worth, just that sense of, like, how can it's helping children to see the worth that they can do more. Because sometimes when I'm even in community working, it's that sense of, like, well, I can't really see it, I don't really see it. And how can we use our organizations, because I think we have so much strength in our connections in our organizations, how can we use them to just do something, say something, like, right now, and go back to, because I feel like many of us are really connected to organizations that can do that work. What would you say?
I can give a short answer. You go ahead first. Sure. My short answer is that we're all adults in this room, and some of us are parents. And the first step to that is taking a very hard look in the mirror. The reason I say that is because I want you to think about the micro reactions that you have to your child or any child, specifically a Black boy child, who comes to you and says, oh, you know what? I'm in grade 9 now, and I'm gonna do the culinary course. And your micro reaction is, why? Why are you doing that? That's for girls. Why are you doing that? Why don't you do X, Y, Z? These are the small missteps we make where these things start. because it goes back to what the cop in the article that I interviewed. He said a child who hasn't found their niche is susceptible to this type of luring. And as much as we blame people outside our community for stereotyping our children, we also stereotype our children ourselves because of our own phobias, our own fears of certain things, and there's many times we're not open and we shut down the things that they're telling us if it doesn't fit what we want for them. And so that it's the look in the mirror, that's where that answer starts for me.
And I just wanted to add, putting your kids in uncomfortable spaces and experiences. Often, we think our kids are gonna be basketball players, rappers. I met a kid that was an Olympic skier. He goes to, I guess, the Olympics to ski, black kid. And I was like, that's different. It's very different. I was intrigued. So I think that we need to, put our kids in different boxes. We keep on putting them in this box of go to school to be a lawyer, a doctor, a social worker. Our kids are more than that, right? And I think we have to think with that mindset. The things that we can't be, we should push on them, but to be greater.
And then lastly,
I'm sorry. I was just going to also say, I echo what Camille and O'Shea said, and I'm just going to also say, you need to indulge your child. I know I was fortunate enough to have parents that no matter what I said I wanted to do, it was always met with, you can do it. So you want to be able to encourage your child and not visit what your deficiencies were on your child. And I think that's the key is, it starts from home. And that's what I just wanted to add to that.
I'll just add one point here. Inside this room were people from multiple ethnicities. I see this room, predominantly black, yes. This documentary is about black youth. But the one thing I did establish during my reporting was that criminal organization target youth. They're targeting 12 to 17 for a reason. They can convince you, show you the law that says you'll be punished at a lesser rate than an adult, right? It's the punishment is lighter. And if you are South Asian or you're from anywhere else in the world and you have a child within that age range, you're under threat. Right now, yes, the black community is facing this crisis, and it is a significant problem and needs to be a priority within our community. But if you feel you're immune because you're from another race, or you live in, as we say, a swanky neighborhood, or you've come up, think again. Because if your child is in a space where they are vulnerable and impressionable, and someone sees them, gets them within that circle of folks, they will be on a bus, they will be in a car going to Thunder Bay. And you guys need to all think about that. So if you feel, I'm not black and this is not an issue that I should focus on, you should think again, because the same officers that were interviewed in this segment have told me that they also sent home, I think Saunders had noted to me that it was twin South Korean brothers that ended up in Thunder Bay. And they were among these chopping networks. And when you go and you see these young people, if you could be in a room with them, in a space with them, you see boys from different backgrounds. You'll see boys that are indigenous. You'll see boys that are from all different races. So it's not just about young black people. So we all need to focus on this in a community, and it won't be a problem until you get that call that your young 13 or 14-year-old has been charged. So we need to all take this very seriously.
And just to add to that, yes, very true. The South Asian community in Peel, we are seeing a rise in suspensions, and even they are, into a lot of crime and they're going missing. So that is, very, very true.
And just lastly, it is a privilege for all of us to be here today. There's probably parents of boys who didn't have the economic capacity to be here. They might have to be at work. They may be working multiple jobs. So just as a community, whether you're black, not black, whatever, if you do have a bit of that extra capacity to show up in other ways, to oversee, extend yourself, to be a parent to others who might not have, that's one little way you can start to support. Just putting that out there as perspective. I know you wanted to come to you because you've been asking, you had your hand up, and so really quickly, what is your question, my dear?
Not be quick.
Thank you. So my name is Nancy Henry. I'm a counselor in North Ajax, and my question is to Camille. So it's a very pointed question. I noticed in your article when you wrote, lately what we've been seeing is guys coming into the neighborhood with these fireworks known as Roman candles. They give them out and encourage the kids to play a game of war. But what they're really looking for is kids who have a tendency to go up to their friends and shoot them with these fireworks. Then the kid becomes the target. So what I wanted to ask you about, and because I have seen this in North Ajax in particular, an orchestrated game of war that has been going on for a few years now, to which I've alerted the Durham Regional Police about, and the young men that show up to play this game are from all over Durham region, Whitby, Oshawa, Pickering, and so on, and they are young black men. And what I wanted to know is, I did not see that in this series that you're showing. I'm sure there's going to be another part. And I was alerted to this article by an educator. I know a lot of educators in this room. I recognize them. Wonderful people. They've done some good work. And it was an educator that alerted me to this article when they heard what happened, because I was on scene. I had seen what was going on. I was alerted by parents in the area. It was getting big. It was up to hundreds of kids, and they were getting dropped off via Uber. And what I want to know is, it's happening, and by the way, so the parents in the room can go back and say something, it's happening Victoria Day and Canada Day weekends, the long weekends. And what I want to know is, are we still seeing that connection? Because I've been pushing and pushing for Durham Regional Police to recognize it's a possibility that there is a connection there from the words in your article and the research that you've done.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Well, that was a Toronto police officer, the same one who works on doing the presentations at the schools. And when I asked him, what scenarios do you see where children are lured in this way? He gave me the example of the local drug dealer bringing in an ice cream van and then pulls up and treats all the kids, and that's his way of kind of showing them, look at me, look at how I have money. And the other example is where they say, hey, let's play this game, and they give them all these Roman candles that are like fireworks, right? And it's like your boys, you're 12, 13, 14. O'Shea's like, yeah, I know where this is going. But what the officer told me is that the older guys, they kind of stand back, and what they look for is the kid who has the little extra gumption to go up to his friend and shoot the firework in close range. Because they want that, and that is the kid that they're going to target, because they want to see who's going to go the little extra mile, who's willing to see someone get hurt. So, of course, as I can imagine, this is causing lots of mayhem in suburban neighborhoods where people are like, what is going on? I wonder if it is just connecting these officers of different departments, because maybe it is that they don't believe us when we say, hey, this is like, they get a report and like, oh, it's just kids, fooling around.
But it's more than that, because
yeah,
this
I know.
year-
So I'm saying that
Yeah.
we need to get a lot of these departments are siloed. And so this officer that I'm speaking to is working and doing what he's doing. Durham Police is doing what they're doing, and they're not always talking to each other. So maybe it's us advocating for like, hey, no, it's not just us. Like, this officer has seen this play out, so listen to what he's saying. And like, we need to maybe have a forum where we invite all of them to speak, or they can actually listen to each other.
Well, I just want to thank you for your words, because it's put a connective piece there that wasn't there before. And it's good for everybody in this room to hear that and know that this is happening, because it's not just about we're bothered by something that's happening. Is it happening for a particular targeted reason? Because what I saw up there was men sitting in a vehicle watching this play out, where boys were going at close range and doing this to each other. And that is concerning, because you put pen to paper about it, you have people that have seen it, and now we have this scenario playing out in our community where we know these boys are going missing from Ajax.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. I want to thank you all for attending tonight. To our amazing panelists, we started a discussion here, yeah? This was an important and a necessary discussion, but it literally is just one of many that still needs to be had. But again, I want to thank you for participating. I want to thank you for attending. We've all committed to watching this documentary when it's officially released, which will be tomorrow, Thursday, January 22nd, on the Fifth Estate's YouTube channel. And if, just in case you missed that, and you want to watch it with the family on TV, if you still watch TV, you can do that. On CBC television on Friday at 9 p.m., and you can catch it again on CBC News Network on Saturday and Sunday at 7 p.m. But a reminder, it is going to be uploaded to the Fifth Estate's YouTube channel Thursday, the 22nd, and you can share that link with all of your friends, all of your family. Yeah. The Fifth Estate's journalists are still here, so they will be sticking around for a little bit, and you can ask them any questions you like, but not too long, because they do have a long drive home, I assume. But if you do want to reach out to the show, you can definitely do so by emailing fifthtips@cbc.ca.